So I don't really want to make this a talk as such. And I was thinking when I was walking down here, I might say a few things that I probably wouldn't say again in public. A bit like myself, my wife is known by a few different names. I'm not talking about within the family. Even within the family, she's known by a few different names. But her name was Uzma. But I think the Hajjud was calling her Umma Abdir Rahmaan because our oldest son is Abdir Rahmaan. And those who knew her from a long time ago, whether family or just friends, would call her something else. I would call her Biba. Let me just start with this anecdote, which will then kind of help you understand my difficulty here, because there is a difficulty. So about a week before my wife passed away, rahmatullah alayh, one of the sisters who's known her since the sister herself was young, and my family, by the grace of Allah, bi'idhnillah, was one of those who helped nurture her in her early days. And she wanted to write a piece on social media whilst my family was living. And she asked me, is that would you mind? And maybe if you could tell me a few things just to kind of spice up the post. And I said, my difficulty is, if I speak about my wife, it's like blowing my own trumpet. And as Muslims, our journey is about self-emptying, emptying the self so that the glory belongs to Allah, not the opposite, not filling the self. Okay? That's the kind of that's just the very opposite of what Islam teaches. And it doesn't matter if we're living in a social media age where you have to sell yourself and whatever. It's just not the done thing within the religious concept. The only time a sheikh or a scholar would have to kind of quote unquote sell himself and tell it as it is when he or she is asked their credentials. Then they have to be honest. No, yes, I have studied this, I have memorized this, I have done that, I have done that. Khalas. Otherwise, and that's for the sake of Allah, for the confidence and for the thiqah, for the reliability and trustworthiness of, yes, you're going to invite me, well, inshallah, I'm connected to the tradition in a proper way. Otherwise, although I could quote many, for various reasons, some of you will understand, I would quote Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, when he used to be praised to his face, so it would happen more than once. And they would speak well of him. He would say, honestly, don't say that, because up until today, I'm trying to be a good Muslim. And literally he would use those words, I'm trying to be a good Muslim. And that kind of is really the reality of us all. From, sheikhs who reached a level of ijtihad and scholarship, like Ibn Taymiyyah, to the rest of us. We're trying to be good Muslims. And if we're succeeding a little, then this is by Allah's grace. If not, then we've only ourselves to question and to complain to. Or complain about. So, on the one hand, speaking about Umma Abdir Rahmaan's virtues, or her role, is in one sense blowing my trumpet. On the other hand, there is this thing that after people pass away, it's kind of more okay to speak about their fada'il, their virtues. Generally, there should be a decent reason behind it. For inspiration, for guidance, for remembering Allah. Something that connects us to Allah and to our obedience to Him, then it's fine. Otherwise, when family, for example, when my in-laws come round, when my brother-in-law comes, when my cousins come, I don't have anyone left of my immediate family. My sister, rahmatullah alayhi, she passed away in 2000. It was my only sister. I've got no brothers. She passed away in 2008 from cancer. My father passed away in 2019, and my mother in 2020. So there was only 4 of us. But when my cousins and in-laws come, and they speak about Umma Abdir Rahmaan, Uzma, it's mashallah. Sometimes it's a religious connection, whatever, but sometimes it's just how she was, and that's fine for family and whatever, without necessarily connecting it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that's understandable. But the rest of us, we try to connect it back to Allah. Otherwise, my wife is really, in that sense, really no different than anyone else. Okay, that's point 1. Point 2 is, for the sake of discussion, so this is not like a fatwa, this is just sake discussion, you can say that there are 2 types of sheikhs and scholars and students of knowledge. The reality is, from my perception, I fit into one category. It's the least useful category in terms of the wider public. It's one of the most useful categories for academic thought, but the least useful for kind of just, does that change the price of bread? And the other category, where alhamdulillah most scholars and students pay their attention to, is that category where alhamdulillah we're dealing with grassroots things. So the clear difference between Dr. Salim and myself, apart from the fact that he is a Hafiz, that his Arabic is better than mine, that his Tajweed and even all those ilmi things, which is just a fact and true, and anyone knows, both of us will know the difference, mashallah, is that he focuses on building immediate communities. I mean, wherever you go, whoever's interacted with Dr. Salim, mashallah, will tell you this, and they will tell me as well. They'll say nice things about me, and the thing that they will say about Dr. Salim, other than the fact that he's an alim and inshallah, a mufti, that he builds communities, and it's kind of visible for everyone to see. So Umma Abdir Rahmaan was like that. We both started. I started a few years in 83, 84. I started practicing the deen. 85, 86, she started practicing the deen. Myself and a brother called Abu Muntasir went to the UMO conference with Dr. Aziz Pasha, rahmatullah alayhi, the Union of Muslim Organisations, the first umbrella organisation in the UK, formed back in the I think 1967. My father was part of it. And we'd been to these conferences before, and without saying too much, it's not something that I was very keen to go back to. It was kind of, when I was younger, I'd fall asleep. When I became practicing, I didn't find anything there that I thought I needed. But anyway, it was an occasion, networking as they now say. So I went there with Abu Muntasir, and all I could hear was this rip-roaring talk, realising that this is a female voice. Like, this is like how we talk, right? This is how and she was just like, mashallah, it was so inspirational and so, it's kind of rock your socks off your feet, so to speak. We roped her into becoming Salafi as well, mashallah. In those days, we were less Salafi and more, look, you know what? We need to just get people back to Tawheed, prayer, obeying Allah, putting cultural Islam in its place, which is not at the top of the pyramid, which is somewhere in the middle or the bottom. And that was that. We didn't have a name. We refused to have a name. Sheikh Suhaib Hassan, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, would say, you can't go around, you've been going around for the last 3 or 4 years, and people refer you as the Circle Brothers, because we used to do a circle in the mosque. And Abu Muntasir would say, no, we don't want to add to the kind of groups that are already happening. There weren't many groups. There weren't certainly no youth groups. There was no YM. There was no Hizb ut-Tahrir. There was no this. But there were kind of mother groups. Jamaat al-Islamis, Ikhwans up north, and Tablighis here and whatever. And they had kind of mini groups. And so all we knew at that time, look, let's not get into divisions. So the only interaction we would have were mainly with Hanafis. If there's someone religiously in the scholarly tradition, there was no Shafis or Malikis, or let alone Hanbalis, Hanafis, and unfortunately we found a lot of them bigoted. So the phrase was all four Imams, who I didn't even know, I thought the fourth one was Wahhabi. I thought it's Maliki, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, and Wahhabi was my initial up thing. When someone said Hanbali, I was thinking, oh, is that the number 5? What is this one? Anyway, and unfortunately, it still applies to some people on madhabs. It's bad education from their teachers more so than coming from themselves, I think. It put us off because of divisions. Then there was divisions. We already noticed that some people don't pray in that mosque in Leytonstone. That's where I was brought up first and foremost. And then all these kind of things. And we just didn't want anything of that. So we thought, now that we are trying to be practicing, we're trying to avoid all the sectarianism. We went to another extreme without guidance, but the intention was good. And that kind of spirit still needs to be there. Not in the form that we took it, we had it, but it needs to be there. That really I want to transcend the sectarian divides between Muslims. And if I am something, I am Hanafi or I'm Shafi or a Hanbali or whatever, it's incidental. It might be that's what my fiqh is rooted in, but it's incidental. Okay? And if I have a particular madrasa, school, Azhari, Deobandi, whatever, again, it should be incidental in the sense that that's really not what I'm aiming for, even though those are sources and madrasas of immense knowledge. If there is going to be a label that we take with seriousness, well, there is one label we all have to by Quranic injunction, which is Islam and Muslim, period. But the next label that we do take with seriousness, and we use it less than Islam and Muslims, but we do use it when it's the right place, is Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Ahl Sunnah or Sunni Islam or Sunni Orthodox. Otherwise, all the other labels are technically incidental. Okay? Even though they're important. And that spirit needs to be kept alive. And that spirit is still not enough in us Muslims. So that's how we started. Now I'm going to fast forward this, and we very soon we called ourselves Salafi for right and wrong reasons. And after a few years, by the early 90s, there was good things happening within that group of brothers and sisters, and there were some bad things happening. And the story is known to most of you, and it's not really important if we don't know it here. Umma Abdir Rahmaan was the first of us on TV as well. So there used to be a program, I think it was on Channel 4, the new Channel 4, called Eastern Eye. And anyone who was brought up as an Asian was trying to find their British Asian identity. Eastern Eye was the program. And then one day they called, and I had got to know my wife by then in the sense that she's a speaker now for us. After that UMO, we weaned her away. And, then again hearing her, I thought, mashallah, this is kind of what we need, kind of thing. But Abdir Rahmaan really, if we leave the fact that she studied Shafi fiqh, she studied seerah, she studied tajweed with ulama, and she has ijazas in those things, but she never taught Shafi'i fiqh. And if she did, she might have only taught it for a year because she didn't feel really confident, kind of thing. Fiqh is it's the hardest of the subjects technically. Theology is the most taxing and abstract of the subjects, but fiqh, because it just covers everything, is kind of the hardest, which is why the theologian in Islam is not the highest scholar, but it's the mujtahid faqih that is the highest ranking scholar. Because Islam sees itself as very practical. It has these basic beliefs and ideas, aqeedah, which at the basics is not complicated, but fiqh from kind of like even basics can be a little bit complicated. We have to do with tahara. Then if you're a lady, your tahara is even more complicated than a man. But even man tahara is complicated, and you can't avoid that. It's not like you can skip over it. And even prayer, many of you will know, in any fiqh book of prayer, let's say a small fiqh book, Nur al-Ida small. So I don't know Nur al-Ida, the Hanafi book, but I know of it. But and it's a beginner's book. It's like a bit like Bidayat al-Abid in the Hanbali school. If you turn to these books and you see the chapter on prayer, 2 pages is going to be on Sifatul Salah, the description of the prayer. And the rest of the 10, 12, 15 pages of that chapter on prayer is going to be on the fiqh of the prayer. Okay? Something like that. Okay? Because the description of the prayer is kind of easy, but the fiqh that surrounds it and holds it up is a little bit more complicated. My point being is the mujtahid is the highest ranking scholar for that kind of reason. Her thing was, going back to that thing, she was in the camp of Dr. Salim. She really focused on community. And honestly, from the last 25 years, I've always seen that is the way to go. I'm more of an abstract academic person, so I generally don't do community. On my road, Windermere Gardens, everyone knows me, the Muslims and non-Muslims, that mashallah, there's that nice pleasant chap in 28 Windermere Gardens who always smiles and is polite and courteous and everyone knew my wife, but in a deeper way. There isn't a single person on that street, Muslim or not, except they've received presents, they've received a dinner invitation, and here's me thinking, oh, dinner invitation, I don't even know them, and can we not get, can we not do this without me and whatever? No, Ali, you have to, whatever. And she would always make this bargain with me: sit for a little while, and then you can go back into your study. In fact, she made that bargain with me even on Eid days. My family is small. Her family is, hugely huge. Kind of at the janazah, that probably was half of my family there. Out of the 1,000 people, that's 500 was probably her family. No, but it's large. And Eid for my family, 4 of us, is quiet, sitting down. Ummi Rahmatullah would make something simple, nice, special, but it's Eid with my wife's side of the family. Honestly, you just need those earpods. Where's the Apple earpods? You put it in you, really loud, really joyous, really celebratory. And so we, from 2nd year of marriage, 3rd year of marriage, she gave me leeway. She said, Abu Aaliyah, no probs. One Eid you do. Well, every Eid we go to my mum and dad in the morning, but then one of the Eids we'd go to South London, and I just made dua. They're all loving and we're all close, but the noise. And the other Eid, I stay with my mum and dad, and if Ammi and Abba were fine and they might be going to someone else's house, I could go home and have Eid for myself. For me, that is Eid, right? MashaAllah. So unfortunately, I'm like that. This is one of those idiosyncratic things. I engage with people in terms of lessons, knowledge, interaction, simply because that's the right thing to do, not by my instinctive nature. I'm not a community person, but I care for community. My wife, mashallah, very much like Dr. Salim, is community. So all of those of you who have wives who have interacted with my wife kind of generally knows, So on the one hand, Shafi fiqh, and she had ijazah in seerah and tajweed, and towards the end of her last 10, 12 years, she just taught Quran mainly, and stopped doing just a Tuesday circle in the local area, but that was it. It was about community, listening to sisters' problems, trying to resolve them, trying to mend families, and so on and so forth. Her tagline, I have to say this, she once heard me say it in a talk, but she made it her tagline. which was really, life is about at-tahabbub ila Allah bima yarda, becoming beloved to Allah by doing that which pleases Him. That's really, what is Islam? At-tahabbub ila Allah bima yarda. Love has to lead the way. Love has to lead the way. We love good for the non-Muslims, and we're ready to serve them in any good way that helps them restore the remembrance of Allah back to their hearts, even if it's not immediately. Even if it's not. So we're just good neighbors. Okay? We're good neighbors sometimes طبيعية, naturally. Nothing to do with Islam necessarily. It's a good thing to have. But higher than that is to do it for Allah and for the deen. Every Muslim, I feel, should have طبيعي hub for people, natural love for people. A lost human being who doesn't even know God, I feel pity for them. That's kind of love. Not because I read a hadith. There's a kind of a naturalness. They say insaniya, and listen to this carefully, because I may say it in a way that gives the wrong impression, and I don't mean to. Many of our mashayikh today say insaniya, just your normal humanness, comes before deeniya, before your religiosity. What does that mean? Hadith in Sahih Muslim mumkin, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looked at the hearts of the people, and He found the hearts of the companions of the Prophet to be the best of the people, because it had amana and sidq in them, qualities like trustworthiness and truthfulness in them. And then He gave them deen. There needs to be some core human virtues. Then when Islam comes on that, it's just nur ala nur. But if there isn't any core human virtues and Islam comes, it's not a disaster. It just means that we have to work hard on the crooked timber of our own humanity. Because if we don't, Islam is made to look really hideously ugly. When Islam or the Sunnah adorns a person with full of ego, it's hideous, it's off-putting, it's ugly. The beauty that you'd expect the Sunnah to exude is not there, because stench of the nafs and the filth of the nafs gets mixed up with it, and you can take oud perfume and you can mix urine in it, it's not going to taste, it's not going to smell too well. So if there is crookedness and religion comes, but we realize we have crookedness and we're working on it, in the process of working on it, Allah gives beauty. Allah gives beauty, because a person can tell from that woman or that man, mashallah, that they have so many human faults. I mean, really more than I expected. But you know what? They have the beauty of humility and neediness and brokenness. There's no arrogance, there's no pretense from them. But when it comes, when religion and sunnah comes without that realization, on crooked timber, the ego, khalas, it's always bad. So we need to have that, which is why Umma Abdir Rahmaan. So when it comes to my kids, really, barring the fact that I am their father, and I am, mashallah, and a little story here and there, on the whole, with no exaggeration, I can say really when the children from the up until the age of 11, 12, 80-90% of the upbringing was by their mother. My wife, rahmatullah, comes from that generation of those brought up in this country who still realize, who still kind of celebrated femininity. Okay, were quite happy that, for the sake of Allah, a good wife obeys her husband. For the sake of Allah, the husband will give a lot of leeway when the wife doesn't do that or whatever. And without going into too much, I was married before, not for very long. It was probably my fault, rather than my ex-wife's. But I remember coming home quite late at night for dawah and whatever, and there would be that kind of usual tension, whatever. Umma Abdir Rahmaan is like, why aren't you out until 2 o'clock kind of thing? Get out there, give dawah. We made a pact when we got married that let's try to get married for the sake of Allah, even though there's natural love and we like each other and whatever, in that sense. But let's devote ourselves to Allah. And I said that, so I really don't expect you to cook and clean more than I expect you to teach. There were no sisters there. We understood that the half of the ummah is women. We men were, and I still believe are, still pretty insensitive about how to give tarbiyah to women. And then there are things that you and I will never know because we're not women, so you just need women, whatever. The lady Aisha radiallahu anha was kind of one of those things. In the Hanbali school, there's a difference of opinion in the Athari Aqidah. Who has the higher virtue, Fadila, the lady Khadija radiallahu anha or the lady Aisha radiallahu anha? Some of the Hanabila, some of the Hanbali say the first, some of the Hanbali say the second. Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali has a really nice way of uniting it. He said, if you're talking about from the aspect of supporting Islam in its early days when there's no one, then the lady Khadija is the greatest, because she was the first Muslim. It was her money, it was her consolation, her support, her speaking to the Prophet, and when he was unsure of himself, there was no one else. Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, the next one was little to do that, and obviously wasn't a lady as well. But if we're talking about preserving sacred knowledge and the tradition, ilmiya, and teaching, and fiqh, and it's the lady Aisha by miles. Okay, so sometimes we need to. Ibn Taymiyyah has this thing. Sometimes people argue over things. It's only because they're coming at it from different perspectives. It's important as students and in life that we learn that. It's important as students in life that we learn that. Sometimes we recognize the perspective someone's coming from, even though we disagree with it wholly. But it's important to recognize where someone's coming from in order to, if you wanted to, help change their mind. But when we don't recognize them, when I'm right, we already create that human barrier. Umma Abdir Rahmaan's life was very much about breaking down barriers. On my street, as I said, that nice chap there, we're not quite sure what his name is, and that probably is true even now. My next door neighbour, both of them were Muslims, but the one who's recently moved in, Yasir from Pakistan, he recently told one of my cousin-in-laws, just the day of the burial when we came back home, he said, there was a Jewish couple living next door to me. They were a nice Jewish couple, kind of secular Jews. Yeah, his name was Barry, I can't remember the lady's name. And we got along really well with them. No religion, whatever. And when Yasir went to view the house, because they were selling and moving out, he said, how's the neighbourhood? And Barry said, we've lived here for 45 years. And it's, although the demography has changed, but it's still really a nice, quiet place. This is back in, say, 2010, something like that. And he said, how are the neighbours? He said, neighbours generally good, but next door, there's a very special lady. And then his wife came and said, her name is Uzma, and you know what? She's a saint. Yasir said, because he and she said that, we brought the house. It's like, whoa. I didn't know that until that day. Across the road, a Caribbean couple, a black couple, they told my wife while she was, like a few years ago, and my wife didn't tell me, the neighbour, when she came to give condolences, said, I said this to your wife a few years ago, and it was a similar story. They asked neighbours, very nice, but across the road, directly in number 28, there is a really nice lady, and you'll get on with her a lot. It's really the right thing to do, not because it's a duty. It needs to come. It works better when it's instinctively, intuitively. Otherwise, if it's duty, it still can work. Something's better than nothing. But it's the way that Muslims need to ingratiate themselves to people. Why? Because whatever else we're about, the Muslim army, and I don't want to get into jihad, but the Muslim army was stopped at the French Pyrenees in 711. From the time of the Prophet and the Salaf, the Muslim expansion of the world and of parts of Europe continued over Spain, the whole of Spain, some Portugal, and then it got to the bottom of France, the south of France, and it got kind of nearly halfway up it. And then at the Battle of Poitiers, okay, the Muslim army was stopped. The French still celebrate that today, okay, which is why they used to eat the croissant as a symbol of the crescent. Now it's just a croissant. And Allah, for some wisdom, didn't allow the introduction of Islam into Northern Europe, or most of Northern Europe, from 711 onwards. And then come the 50s and the 60s and 70s, mass migration of Muslims into Northern Europe and into the UK, such that Islam becomes established. It's Allah telling us that there are different ways that He chooses to help restore the remembrance of Allah back into people's hearts who have forgotten Him. That's our job. Khalas. That's our job. And we don't do it, ideally we don't do it mechanically. We do it through just human service, human khidmah. And we don't do khidmah merely because we get brownie points for dawah. Inshallah, I don't know it to be sinful, but it's not the prophetic way. The prophetic way is trying to be genuine and have that genuine concern. And it's something that the heart needs to be nurtured on. And Umma Abdir Rahmaan's life was a testimony to that in terms of Muslims and non-Muslims. Lily, the Irish lady across the road, her husband died like 12, 15 years ago, and my wife would just sit with her. Irish are always jolly, really nice people. But when she began to be senile, her family moved her into a home. My wife would visit her on a 2-3 weekly basis until she passed away. And yet at the same time, she's doing her dawah, she's doing her this as much as she can. Because Allah gives people that kind of tawfiq. So if sisters or brothers want to take inspiration, alhamdulillah, I would rather say, you know what, look at my wife. Leaving alone that she's a lady, but just look at her as a Muslim, she's probably more inspirational for most of you, as far as I'm concerned, than I could be. The few, one or two academics amongst you and thinkers amongst you and mufakkirun amongst you, inshallah ta'ala, I hope that my writings can inspire. But really for the masses, barring the fact that Abu Aaliyah is a nice chap kind of thing, really it's really not kind of me. My children, Abba, why is the sky blue? Because of refraction of the light, and blue light has a wavelength which is different. My wife, why is blue? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then this nice story comes out. And then they fall in love with God. Right? That's kind of just Allah puts things in. So take that aspiration that, look, we just need to be here and just be ourselves, but ourselves without the ego self. And engage with people for their betterment. And don't want anything back except good for them. Whether that's Muslim or non-Muslim, except that Islam, no one enters paradise except a Muslim. I mean, we're clear on that. We're not the brotherhood of man people. We're only brotherhood of man in the sense that every human deserves some dignity and so on and so forth. Okay? But it's Iman and Allah's ma'rifah, Allah, knowing Allah and the tawheed that follows on from that and the rights that follow on from that. That is what we're about. Okay, and Pakistan, I don't know much about it because I don't have any relatives from there, but I know enough to hear that once upon a time, I don't know how it is now, but not too long ago, really educated, super educated people be more secular. Why? Because one of the reasons is they found that the less educated, apparently religious people, it put them off. How many doctors, physicians, consultants in the UK that I've met over 30, 40 years who are from Pakistan, who are phenomenally educated and phenomenally, and nearly every one of them is a horror story in the beginning of their religious journey, starting in Pakistan. Like the Hajjud said, his was initially a put-off story. So we do really need to find ways of accommodating people into Islam, the way we talk, the way we dress, the way we behave, what I do or do not care about them, all of those things matter. So Umma Abdir Rahmaan, in that sense, I suspect, inshallah ta'ala, Allah accept it from her. She lived her life for that. Really, she lived her life for that. And then it was a matter of Abu Aaliyah, I know brothers have problems, but sisters have additional problems, because the more we're getting secularized, the more Muslim men don't know how to be Muslim men. And then those Muslim men get married to Muslim sisters. Fine for a Muslim man, because I can just kick my finger and say talaq. Okay, barring maybe family pressure that you may or may not have, a Muslim man can just get out of a marriage, boom, just like that. Justly, unjustly, fairly, unfairly. If it's unfair, because we don't have a qadi system, no one can do anything to me. Akhirah, it will be a dog's dinner. Akhirah, it will be a dog's dinner, right? So we need to be aware of that. But for a woman, once she's in, it's like it could be hell to get out. And she says so many sisters have this issue, that issue. Sometimes it's their fault. Most of the time it's a mixture. And so it's about listening and nurturing. And it was about, in the end, even if your husband was a good, loving husband, which many husbands are, right? She would advise sisters, remember this. Either you will leave your husband soon, or your husband will leave you in the sense of death. One will die. And you'll be broken-hearted. Let Allah start filling that gap now. Not just as a gap filler, but actually hearts were created to love Allah. Right? Hearts were created to love Allah. When we say love leads the way, it's, look at this. Allah wants us to leave haram, but one of the rewards He gives is the Prophet ﷺ says, "Izhad fi dunya yuhibbuk Allah." Detach yourself from the world, and Allah will love you. The first level of detachment is tarkul haram, leaving the haram. Then there are higher levels of detachment, which the awliya they get into. Tarkul mubahat, tarkul fudul, leaving things which are not haram, but they're excess. I got one pair of shoes, why do I need two? I got one pair of this, why do I need that? Okay. And then at a higher level, anything that distracts you from Allah. Oh, that curtain, it's halal, but it had a pattern on it. It distracted me. Let's change it for something that doesn't. Most of us, 99.99% of the Muslims in the world today, we need to just do tarkul haram. That in itself will be our jihad, and inshallah Allah will give us the same similar type of reward as the earlier ones when they were doing tarkul mubahat and fudalat. Okay, because the nature of the age is it's not a religious age. You have to swim up tide every breath. Whereas once upon a time it was a religious tide. It might have been the wrong religion, but it is a religious tide. You just couldn't help but be religious. Now when we're in an age in which it is, if it's not anti-religious, it's people are just they don't really care too much about religion. Okay, it's hard to be religious. It's really hard, and if you get that. If you get and understand that is the nature of age, it's nothing to do with, we have Apple computers and we're soon going to be having AI and whatever. No, we've always had technology in one form or fashion. Someone invented the wheel one day, right? And that was the kind of like the Apple computer at the time. Modernity is loss of meaning. I don't know why I was born. I don't know why we seem to be the only people in the universe. I don't know why we have to suffer. I don't know why this. And Islam, Muslims know the meaning behind all of those things. They know that there is meaning and purpose behind suffering. And there is gifts behind suffering as well. Be patient for the sake of Allah with your stomach disease, anything that is inside of you, disease. And Allah says, through the tongue of His Prophet, I'll give you a reward of a shaheed. whatever some stomach diseases there are, including cancer of the stomach, of the organs, of the this, of the chest. Shaheed, if you bear it patience for the sake of Allah. There's meaning behind loss, right? There's meaning behind life. There's meaning behind why once upon a time as an ummah we were strong and now we're kind of brought down. But we have different types of strengths that Allah allows to nurture in us that maybe couldn't have been nurtured before. The Umayyads, you all know, right? I mean, this was not all the scholars, but kind of the early Umayyads, absolutely dominant economically and military. The convert rate in early Islam in the Khilafah was abysmal. People were converting, sometimes out of being conquered, but mainly the Umayyads were more about, you know what, if you remain as a non-Muslim and pay the tax, it kind of helps the Baytul Mal of the Caliph. So we're not really interested in. Okay, leaving alone the individual ulama and awliya who did the da'wah and whatever, but on the whole it wasn't. Now it's completely the opposite. In one sense, we might justifiably feel it's more, you know what, forget about Sharia and this, that and the other. We just want people, Northern Europe, largely falling into atheism, we just want them to return to Allah. What comes after that, who knows? But we just want them to Allah and some basic morality in their life, so that they just have a compass of what it means to be a human, because kind of that compass is being lost. If we get what we're about and why, even in our silence will be effective. My wife was a testimony to that. The hospital, right, Mount Vernon, northwest London, just not Muslims, most of them, there's a few Muslims. They sent flowers and a card, and the consultant says, honestly, in my 15 years of this, I've never seen a patient like her. It's like, after a little while, you get used to these things, but actually they are really phenomenal things. Her mum and dad, Allah bless them, my in-laws, they said, subhanAllah, of course, this is our daughter, but we don't know 3/4 of these things, and now we're hearing all these, so many things, other than we knew she's a speaker, she's a da'iyah, she sacrificed a lot. On the one hand, she was skilled at archery. On the other hand, she started scouts. On the other hand, she started homeschooling. Then she started a homeschooling project. Then she's doing fiqh and this. It can be done when you don't waste your time. It can be done when we don't do the norm for humans today, which is shop. Kind of like, it's not about ibadah, it's about shop. In some form of fashion, consumerism. And when we put priorities on Allah, Allah opens ways, and He can open ways from your own house. Honestly, barring a few places in the last 15 years that my wife travelled to, and then there were local circles here in Salam Centre and things like that, most of it was in the last year so this Ramadan, all 30 days plus 2 days of Eid and after in hospital. First 10 days of Dhul Hijjah and the 3 days of Eid in hospital. Most of this year has been on her bed or in hospital or in A&E, which is why she decided at the end of July she'll now forego the chemo treatment, because it doesn't seem to be as beneficial as the previous years from 2014 onwards. But the amount of da'wah she did and the amount of khatams she did, mashallah, and yet had time for thing, because Allah puts barakah in time. So realize that there's a lot that we can take from the likes of such a person. Again, it's difficult because it's blowing my own trumpet. I would like to say more, but I've already gone way over the top in that sense. But just know where we are, in what age we are, what's our higher purpose, and less finger wagging and more empathizing and having pity. Here is a people who have various virtues. I still, despite what's happened even in more recent times with the rise of Islamophobia, would still prefer, be more comfortable being tried in an English or a British court than some courts in the Muslim world, which I've had dealings with, directly or indirectly. Because there are certain virtues here, but there is no iman. And it's not that they have all the virtues. Modesty is long gone, okay? But they need iman. We need to be here for that. Not because Allah will ask us, which He will, but because it's just what concerned people do. It's just the prophetic way, right? It's a prophetic way, not because it's a Sharia thing, but that's good. It's because it's just the way that Allah created the best of human beings to be. So when Tahajjud was saying the book that really just changed his life, which is on Mudassir's bookshelf, the English translation, and it was, in one sense, it was connected with what we were doing. We were doing ta'arif. We were introducing ourselves to one another. Ta'arif, arafa, to come to know, to be acquainted with. Well, that book was Ash-Shifa bi Ta'arif Huquq al-Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ash-Shifa, the cure, bi Ta'arif Huquq al-Mustafa, in knowing the rights of the chosen one sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because when we know who he is, subhanallah, it's a game changer, and we know how to be. Last thing my wife wrote before her handwriting went really illegible, so probably 24, 28 hours before she passed away, someone must have asked her a question from who came, and she can't speak, so she's been writing in a book like that, and you can just barely make it out. Connect to Allah, the word connect isn't spelled correctly. Connect to Allah, all about knowing, doing, becoming. And in knowing faith, doing works of faith, becoming transformed by faith. And that's really it. That's dawah. At-tahabbub ilallah, or knowing, doing and becoming. Same thing. Two sides of the same coin. So inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy upon my family, all the men and women of this community years and years gone by, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless and have mercy upon all of the Muslims, the believing men and the believing women, the Muslim men and the Muslim women, those that are with us and those that have passed on. Innaka antal ghafoor rahim. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillah rabbil alamin.